The first knock came at 2:37 a.m., too soft to wake the dog, but loud enough to drag Lena from a dream she didn't want to leave. She blinked into the darkness of her small cottage, the patter of rain like whispering fingers across the windows. The kind of rain that made the world feel distant and hidden. She turned toward the door, heart drumming. No one visited this far out in the woods, especially not at this hour. Another knock, firmer this time. She slipped out of bed, grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, and padded barefoot to the front door. Her golden retriever, Max, lifted his head but didn't growl. Odd. He always barked at strangers. "Who's there?" she called through the wood. No response. She peered through the peephole. Nothing but the reflection of her own eye in the rain-smeared glass. Flicking on the porch light, she slowly opened the door. There was no one on the porch. Just trees, the rain, and the thick, curling fog creeping through the clearing like something alive. She shivered. Probably just a branch, she whispered to herself and shut the door. But as she turned around, something was on the floor. A photograph. Wet and old, edges curled and brown. It hadn't been there before. She picked it up. It showed her house, but not as it looked now. This was decades ago. Same structure, different color. And standing in front of the porch were 5 people. A woman holding a baby, a man in a suit, 2 small children, and an old woman in a black dress with no face. Literally, her face had been scratched out. Lena stared at it, her skin prickling. She flipped it over. Written in shaky handwriting, "She never left." That was when Max started growling. Low, guttural, the kind of sound dogs make when something isn't right. She turned. He stood at the end of the hall, hackles up, staring into the kitchen. It was dark, except for the small red glow of the microwave clock. 2:42 a.m. She aimed her flashlight. The beam swept across the room, landed on the kitchen window. A face stared back, pale, still, watching. She screamed and dropped the flashlight. The beam spun wildly across the floor. Max barked and charged. By the time she found the courage to run into the kitchen, the face was gone. The window was closed, locked from the inside. She called the sheriff. An hour later, Deputy Harris arrived in a truck, shaking his head at the weather. "No footprints," he said, "but this fog would have covered them." She showed him the photo. He squinted at it. "Weird. This looks like the Murphy place from back in the 50s. That family vanished, didn't they?" She frowned. "What do you mean, vanished?" He sighed, tapping the photo. "They went missing in 1957. Whole family. Never found. Locals say the grandma was into weird stuff. Medium or something. That's probably her there, the one scratched out." "Scratched out before or after they disappeared?" Lena asked. Harris looked at her, then down at the photo again. "Can't tell, but I'd lock your doors tonight, just in case." After he left, Lena tried to sleep, but every creak in the floor, every rustle of wind against the windows felt deliberate. At 3:55 a.m., the power went out. The heater died. The lights. Everything. She wrapped herself in blankets and sat in the living room, flashlight by her side, Max curled against her legs. The rain grew harder, louder, like footsteps on the roof. She didn't sleep. At sunrise, the power flicked back on, and the photo was gone. She searched the house, every drawer, every surface. Nothing. She thought she might be losing her mind. But the next night, the knocking came again. 2:37 a.m. This time, she didn't move. She just listened. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. Until something whispered her name through the mail slot. Lena. Her blood turned cold. She grabbed the flashlight. Max barked. She ran to the door and flung it open. Empty porch. Another photo on the ground. This time, a close-up of her, standing at her window, taken from the woods. She spun, staring out at the forest. Dark, quiet. She called the sheriff again. He came, searched, found nothing. But Lena couldn't stay. She packed a bag and checked into the motel in town. She didn't sleep there either, because at 2:37 a.m., someone knocked on the motel door, and another photo slid beneath it. Her sleeping in the motel bed. But she hadn't fallen asleep. That's when she realized, whoever this was, they weren't taking pictures. They were showing her what they wanted to happen. She returned to the cottage the next day with a plan. She set up cameras, motion sensors. Max stayed by her side. She waited. At 2:37 a.m., everything triggered at once. Lights flashed. Alarms blared. She ran to the monitors. Nothing. All cameras showed static. And then the screen showed the kitchen. But not how it looked now. It looked like it had in the photo from the 50s. Old wallpaper. Different cabinets. The family stood around the table, all except the old woman. They were frozen, unmoving, until they all turned in perfect unison to stare directly into the camera. Then it cut to black. The house shook. A scream, not from outside, but from beneath the floorboards. She grabbed Max and ran. She didn't look back. That was a week ago. She stays with a friend now, far from the woods. But last night at 2:37 a.m., she got a The last thing I saw before the lights went out was a shadow that didn't belong to anyone in the room. The storm had rolled in faster than expected, thunder crackling overhead, lightning flashing every few seconds, casting the living room into a strobe-lit theater of fear. Sarah sat curled under a blanket on the couch, cradling a mug of lukewarm tea. Her husband, Mark, paced by the window, watching the sheets of rain drown their quiet street. Power outages weren't new in this part of the countryside, but tonight, something felt off. "I swear I just saw someone standing by the fence," Mark muttered. Sarah looked up, her face pale. "Probably a tree." "You always think trees are people in the dark." Mark didn't laugh. His eyes didn't leave the window. It was a person. They were just still. Lightning struck again. The flash illuminated the yard for a split second. Nothing. "You're seeing things." Another flash. This time, both of them saw a figure, just standing at the edge of their backyard, not moving, not flinching at the rain. Mark reached for his phone, but the signal was dead. "I'm going out there," he said. "No," Sarah said quickly. "Don't leave me alone. Just wait. Maybe they'll go." But 5 minutes passed, then 10. The figure didn't move. The storm only grew worse, wind howling now like it was trying to get inside. "I'll grab the flashlight," Mark said, already halfway to the back door. As soon as he opened it, the power cut out with a heavy click. The house went black. Sarah screamed. "Stay right there," Mark yelled, his silhouette swallowed by the dark as he stepped into the rain. Sarah stood in the kitchen, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She heard the squelch of Mark's boots on the soaked grass. Heard him call out, "Hey, you okay?" Then silence. Then screaming. Mark's scream was sharp, panicked, and suddenly cut short. Then nothing. Just the rain pounding the roof. Sarah bolted the door and ran to the living room, fumbling through drawers until she found a candle. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the lighter. Finally, a dim glow filled the room. She called his name. No answer. The clock ticked loudly. Then, a slow knock at the door. She froze. 3 knocks. Then, silence. She whispered, "Mark?" Nothing. The knock came again, slower this time. Not a pounding. A tap. Like someone was dragging their hand across the wood and occasionally letting their knuckles fall. Sarah stood up slowly, grabbing a knife from the kitchen. Her feet moved without her meaning to, step by trembling step. She peered through the peephole. There was no one there. Lightning flashed again, and in that instant, she saw it. Not at the door. Inside. Behind her. A shadow that shouldn't have been there. She spun around, but the candle's glow revealed only empty furniture. She backed up into the hallway, heart thudding. She could still hear the rain, the thunder, the occasional gust of wind slamming against the house. But underneath it all, she heard breathing. Not hers. Something was in the house. Her phone. She needed her phone. She ran to the bedroom, nearly tripping on the rug, and slammed the door shut behind her, fumbling through drawers. Finally, she found it. The screen flickered to life. No signal. Battery at 9%. She texted her sister anyway. Someone's in the house. Mark is gone. Please call the police. No delivery status. Dead signal. Then click. The bedroom door unlocked itself. She hadn't touched it. She stepped back. Her phone screen glitched, lines tearing across it like static. Then the flashlight turned on by itself. Then off. Then on again. Footsteps, slow. Wet. She saw movement under the doorframe. 2 shadowy feet. Sarah. A voice rasped. Her blood froze. Let me in. She shook her head, even though no one could see her. No, you're not real. The voice grew closer to the door. Mark invited me, but he screamed. So loud. He screamed and screamed. The lights flickered. Her phone died. Then silence. Nothing but the storm outside. The door creaked open slowly. No wind. No hands. Just darkness beyond the threshold. Sarah didn't wait. She lunged for the window, ripping it open. Cold rain slapped her face. She climbed out, barefoot, scraping her legs against the sill. She ran. Into the yard. Past the garden, into the woods behind the house. Branches whipped her arms. Mud sucked at her feet. But she didn't stop running until she couldn't breathe. She collapsed against a tree, soaked and sobbing. Then, a flashlight from the direction of her house. Sarah! It was Mark's voice. She stood up, heart flooding with relief. Mark. I thought, oh my God, I thought you were. But then she stopped. Because Mark wasn't holding the flashlight. It was floating. And the figure behind it wasn't him. It looked like him. Same clothes, same face, but the eyes were wrong. Completely black. Come home, Sarah, it said in a voice like cracked glass. She turned and ran again, blindly through the woods until her feet found the gravel of the neighbor's driveway. She banged on their door until someone opened it. A kind old man pulled her inside, wrapped her in towels, tried to call the police. It took 2 hours for the storm to die down and for help to arrive. They searched her house. No sign of Mark. No footprints in the yard except Sarah's. No intruder. No broken windows. The power returned, but the phones remained dead for another day. When they checked security footage from a neighbor's camera, they saw Mark walking outside, and then vanishing. Just gone. No struggle. No figure. Just empty space. Sarah moved away 3 weeks later. But sometimes, when the power cuts out and the rain comes heavy, she swears she hears that voice again. Let me in. It was raining so hard that the sound seemed to come from inside the house. Rain didn't fall. It detonated, great sheets of water slamming the tin roof like artillery shells. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with the gas heater turned low, the only island of light in the old farmhouse he'd inherited and never loved. The walls throbbed with the storm, boards flexing as if some enormous lung breathed behind the wallpaper. He had grown up with those groans, knew every creak of joist and every sigh of plaster, but tonight the house sounded different, alert, listening, waiting. Between thunderclaps he heard the other noise. Footsteps. Not the random scuffs of wind-blown debris, but deliberate, measured, squelching steps in wet grass. They paused whenever he strained to listen, then resumed when he convinced himself it was nothing. He turned the heater down further, heart ticking like a faulty metronome, and stared at the stack of letters he had brought in from the attic that afternoon. Most were yellow, crumbling, grocery receipts, seed catalogs, a postcard from 1987. On top sat one envelope so pristine it looked printed that morning. Heavy cream stalk, no stamp, no postmark, only his name Marcus in handwriting he recognized but could not place. He had torn it open 30 minutes ago and read the single sentence a dozen times. "I remember what you did." The words were ordinary ink, yet they burned on the page. 12 years ago, on a night like this, lightning had struck the barn. Marcus, 16, skinny, terrified, had stood in the doorway while flames swallowed hay bales and beams like greedy mouths. Inside, Uncle Ray had been passed out drunk on a pile of feed sacks. Marcus had hesitated, only a second, maybe two, then backed away, telling himself the smoke was too thick, the heat too fierce. Later, they found Ray curled against the far wall, arm over his face, mouth open in a silent scream. The coroner said death was quick. Marcus never corrected anyone. He never told them about the hesitation, about the relief that had flashed through him when he realized the old man wouldn't hit him again. Now, at 31, he tried to swallow the memory, but it stuck like bone shards in his throat. He folded the letter, stuffed it into his pocket, and stood. The footsteps outside had stopped. Silence pressed in, so complete he heard the faint whistle of blood in his ears. He locked the front door, the back, latched windows, drew curtains. None of it helped. The farmhouse felt porous, as if the storm could walk through walls. He tried the television, static, then nothing. The lights flickered once and died. The heater's pilot snuffed out with a soft pop. Darkness surged, thick and velvet. Marcus fumbled for his phone. Dead battery, screen as black as the room. He smelled smoke, faint but unmistakable, the ghost of an old barn fire riding the rain. The floor creaked behind him. He spun, heart slamming ribs. Nothing. Another creak, closer, dragging now, as if someone pulled a heavy, soaked leg. He tried to speak. Only a dry click came. His hand found the table lamp. The bulb exploded in his fist, glass nicking skin, blood beating bright as Christmas lights. He staggered backward, hip striking the table. A second envelope lay there. He hadn't seen it arrive. Paper translucent with rainwater, ink bleeding like veins. "You watched me burn." He dropped the envelope as though it scalded. The footsteps started again, not outside anymore, inside, in the hallway, slow and deliberate. He bolted for the front door, fingers slipping on the deadbolt. The knob twisted on its own, once, twice, resisting his grip. Something pushed from the other side, steady, patient. Marcus screamed and threw his shoulder against the door, forcing it shut. The footsteps continued, unhurried, as if they knew every exit. He ran upstairs, taking steps 3 at a time, the old board screaming beneath him. At the landing, he risked a glance back. The hallway was empty, but each footstep left a wet, black print that steamed in the cold air. He slammed the attic trapdoor, slid the iron bolt home, and crouched beneath the round window, panting. Rain hammered the roof like thrown gravel. Below, the yard had become a shallow lake, moonlight cutting silver scars across the surface. Something moved in the water. A shape rose, a silhouette blacker than the night, shoulders hunched, head cocked unnaturally. It stood knee-deep, rain hissing against skin that looked charred and cracked, glowing embers showing through fissures. Uncle Ray. But not. The figure's mouth hung open, lower lip split and dangling. Water streamed off him, yet steamed where it touched. He raised one arm, slow as rust, and pointed at the attic window. Where finger met glass, the pane began to blister. Marcus jerked back. The attic door creaked below him. Not the bolt giving, something heavier, pressing upward, bowing the wood. The smell of smoke intensified, mixed with wet hay and cooked meat. He grabbed an old iron curtain rod, heart jackhammering, and waited. The trapdoor bulged, paint peeling in curls. A blackened hand pushed through the gap. No flesh, just cracked charcoal, knuckles glowing like coals. Marcus drove the rod downward. Metal struck bone with a wet crunch. A scream, not human, not animal, ripped through the attic. 1,000 voices braided into one. The hand withdrew, but the scream kept spiraling, echoing off rafters, vibrating the boards beneath his feet. Smoke poured through the crack, thick and acrid. Then silence. The attic cooled so fast frost spidered across the window. Marcus stayed crouched, rod clutched like a spear, until the first gray light of dawn seeped through the glass. Only then did he descend. The house looked untouched. No scorch marks, no broken doors. Even the exploded bulb had reformed, sitting innocently in the lamp. But the scent lingered, burnt hair, wet ash. On the kitchen table lay a third envelope, nailed to the wood with a rusted barn nail. Paper crisp, dry, impossible. He did not open it. He left it there, grabbed his keys, and walked out into a morning washed clean by rain. The yard was empty. No footprints. No steaming lake. Only the old mailbox, door yawning open. Inside waited another envelope. He did not touch it. He drove away without looking back, tires hissing on wet gravel until the farmhouse shrank to a postage stamp in the rearview mirror. He rented a studio apartment above a laundromat in the city, changed his number, told no one where he had gone. For weeks the nightmares came nightly. The barn inferno, Uncle Ray's mouth opening to release moths of flame, the farmhouse dissolving into charcoal around him. Each morning he woke with the taste of smoke in his throat and fragments of ash in his sheets. He bought blackout curtains, white noise machines, anything to drown out the memory of rain that sounded like breathing. But the past is patient. 6 months later, on the first humid night of July, thunder rolled in low and constant. Marcus lay awake counting seconds between flashes. At 3:17 a.m., the city power flickered and died. The apartment went dark, and with it every white noise machine. Silence fell, thick, deliberate. Then came the sound he dreaded. Footsteps. Not in the hallway outside his door. Inside the apartment. Bare feet on hardwood, slow and wet, leaving invisible prints that chilled the air as they advanced. He fumbled for his phone. Dead. He reached for the flashlight in the drawer. Batteries leaked acid across his palm. Lightning flashed. For an instant, the studio was illuminated. Every wall covered in envelopes, hundreds of them, paper white and perfectly dry, each bearing his name in the same relentless handwriting. The footsteps stopped beside his bed. He smelled smoke again. He felt heat, dry, furnace heat on his face. Something leaned over him, breath reeking of charred hay. A voice, soft and familiar. Again. Marcus tried to scream, but the sound emerged as a rush of hot wind. The mattress beneath him blackened, curled, ignited. Flames climbed the walls, yet the envelopes did not burn. They only multiplied, fluttering like moths before settling. When the fire department arrived at dawn, neighbors reported no smoke, no heat, only Marcus standing barefoot on the sidewalk, clothes intact, eyes wide and unseeing. Inside the apartment, they found every surface coated in a fine layer of ash. On the kitchen counter sat a single envelope, crisp and cream, unmarred by soot. The fire lieutenant opened it. Inside was one word, written in ash that crumbled at the touch. Again. They released him after 72 hours of observation. No burns. No carbon monoxide. No explanation. He moved again, farther this time, to a desert town where rain was rare and thunder rarer still. He bought blackout curtains, soundproofing foam, a generator. He threw away every envelope he found, on his windshield, in his mailbox, once tucked into the pocket of a jacket he hadn't worn in years. Each time the paper was pristine, the ink unchanged. Years passed. The nightmares softened into uneasy dreams, but the smell of smoke never left his clothes. On his 35th birthday, he woke to find the desert sky black with storm clouds, an impossible deluge. At 3:17 a.m., the generator failed. Rain hammered the tin roof like artillery. Footsteps crossed the sand outside, soft and wet. He did not get up. He lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, and waited. The door opened. No lock resisted. No alarm sounded. Heat rolled in first, then the scent of burning wood and hair. A shadow filled the doorway, tall, crooked, skin cracked open to show glowing seams of coal. It did not speak. It simply extended one blackened hand and dropped a final envelope onto his chest. Marcus opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a single Polaroid. The photograph showed a barn ablaze, orange light licking the night sky. In the foreground stood a 16-year-old boy, himself, face lit by fire, eyes wide with something between horror and relief. Behind the boy, barely visible in the smoke, stood a second figure, Uncle Ray, arms raised, mouth open in a scream that had lasted 12 years and would last forever. The photograph ignited in his hand, flameless yet searing. The desert house filled with white fire that cast no shadows. Neighbors later reported no smoke, no screaming engines, only the sudden absence of sound where a home had been. In the morning, they found a perfect circle of ash on the sand, 23 feet across. At its center lay a single, unburned envelope. Every year, on the anniversary of the barn fire, that circle reappears, sometimes in a Kansas wheat field, sometimes on a city sidewalk, sometimes beneath fresh snow. Inside the envelope is always the same photograph, always the same word scrawled in ash. Again. The storm hit harder than any of the weather apps predicted. What was supposed to be a light autumn shower turned into a solid wall of water, the kind that turns forest trails into creeks and makes the dark feel alive. Jenna, Caleb, and Marcus had left the main road at dusk, following a GPS route that promised a scenic shortcut. By 9:47 p.m., they were lost, soaked, and arguing over whose phone had the last bar of signal. When the headlights finally caught the half-buried sign, Camp Hollow Creek, closed 1982, relief outweighed every ghost story any of them had ever heard. They rolled the car beneath a sagging pine and killed the engine. For a moment, the only sound was rain drumming on the roof and the rhythmic creak of windshield wipers that no longer had anything to wipe. Jenna stared at the sign. Moss had swallowed most of the letters, but the word closed stood out like a brand. She thought she smelled smoke beneath the wet earth and pine, but told herself it was just lightning somewhere far off. Marcus was already out of the car, flashlight slicing through sheets of rain. "Shelter, shelter," he yelled over the storm. The others followed, backpacks over their heads, sneakers squelching in ankle-deep mud. A lightning flash lit the camp in stark black and white, cabins listing like broken teeth, a cafeteria with half its roof collapsed, and a chapel slumped sideways as though praying for mercy. For one frozen heartbeat, Jenna saw faces in every window, round, pale, watching, then darkness swallowed them again. The Counselor Lodge was the largest structure still standing. They climbed warped steps and pushed through a swollen door that screamed on rusted hinges. Inside smelled of mildew and something metallic that coated the tongue. Caleb struck his lighter. Flame leapt, danced across warped floorboards, and revealed words carved into the wall beside the fireplace. They locked us in. Jenna traced the letters with trembling fingers. The grooves were charred, edges splintered as if carved with something hot. They built a small fire from dry kindling Caleb scavenged beneath the sagging porch. Light crawled across the room, picking out details better left unseen. Child-sized handprints burned into the floorboards, a circle of melted plastic chairs, and a counselor clipboard warped into a claw. Jenna opened her mouth, thought better, then spoke anyway. There was a fire. Summer of '82. 23 kids and 2 counselors. They thought it was a prank. They kept the doors latched. Her voice cracked. Some were never found. Caleb rolled his eyes, but the gesture felt hollow. Marcus stared at the clipboard, jaw clenched. Outside, wind howled like a warning. Thunder shook the lodge. The fire guttered. Then came the first knock, slow, deliberate, against the back wall. Not wood on wood, bone on wood. Flashlights snapped on, beams jittering across peeling wallpaper. Nothing. Caleb edged to a window. Rain streaked the glass like tears. Lightning flashed. For a split second, the yard was full. Children in charred pajamas, hair singed away, faces blistered and shining. They stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes glowing ember red. Then darkness again, and the only sound was the frantic thud of 3 hearts. Marcus found a rusted fire axe near the hearth. Caleb gripped a table leg. Jenna clutched the small silver cross at her throat, lips moving in a prayer she hadn't uttered since Sunday school. The knocking came again, closer, followed by a child's giggle, wet and broken. The temperature plummeted. Breath plumed. The fire died as though strangled. They ran for the door. It slammed shut before they reached it, latch dropping by itself. The room tilted. Floorboards buckled. Flames erupted, not orange, but ghost white, licking up the walls without consuming them. In the firelight, the room stretched, ceiling rising into darkness, walls receding until the lodge became a cavern of burning memory. Children stepped from the flames. Skin cracked and peeled, revealing cold, bright muscle beneath. One girl reached for Jenna with fingers that crumbled to ash. "Where were you?" she whispered, voice layered with every child who had ever burned. "You let us stay." Caleb swung the axe. It passed through the girl as through smoke. Marcus kicked the door. Wood splintered but held. Flames wrapped around their ankles, cold yet searing. The axe clattered away, handle already charcoal. Marcus screamed as the fire crawled up his legs, jeans igniting in pale fire that left no mark but agony. Jenna spotted the chapel through a window, intact amid the ruin. She grabbed Marcus, dragged him toward the back exit. The doorframe was warped, but desperation lent strength. They burst into rain and thunder, fire chasing them across the yard in white sheets. Behind them, Caleb's silhouette burned in the doorway, arms outstretched, mouth open in a soundless howl. Then the doorway folded in on itself like paper, and the lodge was gone. Only a blackened outline remained, steaming in the rain. They stumbled into the chapel. Doors slammed shut behind them. Inside, thousands of unlit candles lined the pews. The air was warmer, but thick, tasting of copper and wet wool. Marcus collapsed, clawing at legs that bore no burns yet screamed with every heartbeat. Lightning illuminated stained glass windows depicting children with wings of flame. At the altar knelt a single figure in a charred counselor's jacket. When she lifted her head, Jenna saw her own face aged decades, skin cracked like old porcelain. "You're late," the woman said, voice echoing from every candle wick. The fire never ends. It only waits for witnesses. Behind Jenna, the chapel doors locked. Candles ignited in a rolling wave, white flames climbing toward the vaulted ceiling. Marcus's screams became a single note, then silence. The woman, Jenna's future self, extended a counselor's whistle, melted and fused to her palm. "Blow it," she said. "Call the next ones." Jenna backed away, but the chapel shrank, walls pressing in until she knelt in a circle of candles no larger than a child's bedroom. The whistle touched her lips of its own accord. She inhaled. The chapel, the storm, the world vanished. Morning broke clear and cold. Search and rescue found no trace of the missing hikers. Only the car, driver's door open, engine cold. A single footprint, child-sized, bare, led from the driver's seat into the ashes of a foundation that maps said had never existed. Among the ashes lay a charred whistle and a silver cross, its chain snapped. The camp sign has since been replaced. It now reads, Camp Hollow Creek Opening Summer 2025. Beneath it, freshly stenciled in black spray paint. We're still waiting. When Ravi heard the knock at the door, he didn't expect it to be his mother. She had died 3 years ago. The knock wasn't loud, but it was precise. 3 soft raps that echoed strangely through the hallway of his small apartment. Rain was tapping the window pane like nervous fingers, and thunder rolled quietly in the distance. He looked up from the dim glow of his laptop, heart suddenly racing. The spreadsheet on the screen blurred as his vision unfocused, numbers and formulas dissolving into meaningless pixels. Who the hell would come this late? The digital clock in the corner read 11:47 p.m. His neighbors were early sleepers. Mrs. Chen next door was always in bed by 9, and the young couple across the hall had a newborn that demanded all their attention. The building superintendent lived on the ground floor and never ventured up after hours unless there was an emergency. He stood, his chair creaking against the silence, and walked to the peephole. His bare feet made no sound on the cold hardwood floor. The apartment felt different tonight, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He hesitated, hand hovering over the brass doorknob that he'd been meaning to replace for months. Another knock. Same rhythm. Same eerie calmness. His spine tingled, and goosebumps spread across his forearms like a rash. The sound seemed to come not just from the door, but from within the walls themselves, as if the building was breathing. Slowly, he leaned forward and looked through the small glass circle. No one. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, illuminated by the flickering fluorescent light that the landlord refused to fix. Shadows danced across the faded carpet, and the wallpaper, a hideous floral pattern from the 1970s, seemed to shift and writhe in the uncertain light. He opened the door a crack and peeked outside. The corridor was empty, but wet footprints led from the stairwell directly to his front door. Bare footprints, too small to belong to any grown man. They were delicate, feminine, with high arches that he recognized but couldn't quite place. The water was still fresh, glistening under the harsh hallway lighting. He closed the door quickly, the deadbolt clicking with finality. Probably some kid messing around, he muttered, trying to shake the unease that crawled up his spine like ice water. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Children didn't walk barefoot in thunderstorms. Children didn't leave prints that made his chest tighten with recognition. Back at his desk, he sat down but couldn't focus. The quarterly reports that had seemed so urgent an hour ago now felt trivial, meaningless. The silence was too heavy, pressing against his eardrums like the weight of deep water. His thoughts drifted toward the one memory he tried to avoid, the one that lurked in the corners of his mind during quiet moments like these. The hospital bed. White sheets pulled up to her chin. The steady beep of machines that measured a life slowly ebbing away. Her hands, once strong enough to knead dough for hours, now paper thin and trembling. "You'll come back and take care of me, won't you, Ravi?" Her voice had been barely a whisper, lost in the antiseptic hum of the intensive care unit. He had been 25 then, fresh out of college, drunk on the possibilities that awaited him in the city. The job offer had been too good to refuse, the salary more than his father had ever made in the small town where they'd grown up. "I will, Ma, I promise." The lie had tasted bitter even as he spoke it. He could see it in her eyes. She knew, somewhere deep down, that he wouldn't come back. Not in time. Not when it mattered. He never did. A year after he left for the city, building his career, chasing promotions and corner offices, she died alone. The neighbor had found her 3 days later, still in her favorite armchair, the one by the window where she used to wait for him to call. The guilt chewed him daily, a constant ache that no amount of success could numb. Now, he heard something else, a faint rustle in the kitchen, like the shuffle of bare feet across linoleum. The sound was so soft he almost convinced himself it was the wind, but there was a rhythm to it, a purposefulness that made his mouth go dry. He turned toward the kitchen, his neck creaking like old wood. "Hello?" he called, trying to sound firm, authoritative. The word echoed back to him, hollow and afraid. Silence stretched between the rooms like a held breath. He rose again, his legs unsteady, and moved cautiously toward the kitchen. Each step seemed to echo forever, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. The apartment felt larger somehow. The familiar distances stretched and distorted. The light was off. He flicked the switch, muscle memory guiding his hand to the worn plastic. Nothing. Power outage, maybe, though he could still hear the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. He reached for his phone. The screen's blue glow harsh against the darkness. His fingers trembled as he activated the flashlight. The beam cut across the room, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently, and landed on the small ceramic teacup that had once belonged to his mother. It sat on the counter, steam rising from its depths as if it had just been filled with hot tea. The delicate blue flowers painted on its surface seemed to shimmer in the phone's light. But he was sure he'd packed it away after her funeral. He remembered wrapping it carefully in newspaper, placing it in the cardboard box with her other belongings that he'd never had the courage to open. The box was still in his closet, sealed with packing tape and covered in dust. His breath caught in his throat. Then the teacup moved just slightly, just enough to make the tiniest clink against the saucer. The sound rang out clear and sharp, like a bell tolling in the distance. A drop of tea spilled over the rim, creating a dark stain on the white ceramic. He stumbled backward, the phone trembling so violently in his grip that the light danced wildly across the walls. His hip struck the kitchen island, sending a sharp pain up his spine, but he barely noticed. "Ma?" he whispered, the word torn from his throat like a prayer. There was no reply. Just the rain outside, falling harder now, drumming against the windows with increasing fury. The temperature in the apartment had dropped noticeably. He could see his breath misting in the phone's light, and the growing chills seemed to seep into his bones. He backed away slowly, but paused when he saw something else on the kitchen wall, written in condensation as if someone had breathed heavily on the paint. The letters were shaky, formed by a trembling finger. "You promised." His knees buckled, and he grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. The words seemed to pulse with their own light, growing brighter and dimmer as the moisture caught the reflection of his phone. No, this isn't happening." The denial came out as a whimper. He was 38 years old, a senior analyst at a prestigious firm, a rational man who believed in spreadsheets and quarterly projections. Ghosts were for children and movies, not for tiny apartments in the city where the rent was too high and the walls were too thin. He turned and ran back to the hallway, his bare feet slapping against the floor. He grabbed his keys from the small table by the door, the metal cold and reassuring in his palm. But when he tried to turn the deadbolt, it wouldn't move. The door wasn't locked, it just refused to budge, as if something was holding it shut from the other side. He threw his shoulder against it, rattling the frame, but it held firm. And then, behind him, a voice he hadn't heard in years. Soft, broken, familiar. "You left me, Beta." The endearment hit him like a physical blow. Beta, little son. She had called him that from the day he was born until the day he stopped visiting. He froze, his hand still gripping the doorknob, knuckles white with strain. "Every day, I waited." The voice was closer now, and he could feel the temperature dropping further. His breath came in short, visible puffs. Slowly, as if moving through thick water, he turned. She stood just inside the kitchen doorway. His mother, Kamala Sharma, who had raised him alone after his father died, who had worked double shifts at the textile factory to pay for his education, who had never asked for anything except his presence. Her form was translucent, barely there, a shadow soaked in rain. Water dripped from her gray hair, pooling at her feet, the same small, bare feet that had left prints in the hallway. She wore the blue cotton sari she'd been buried in, the one with the silver border that she'd saved for special occasions. Her eyes, sunken and hollow, stared through him with sorrow, not malice. They held the same expression he remembered from his last visit home, disappointed but still loving, resigned but never quite giving up hope. "I tried to call you," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years of silence. "You never answered." The accusations hit harder than any anger could have. He remembered those calls, the phone ringing while he was in meetings or at client dinners or lying in bed on Sunday mornings, too hungover and selfish to pick up. He'd told himself he would call her back later, when he had more time, when he wasn't so busy building his life. Ravi shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I couldn't come. I had work. I was going to. I died alone, she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. In pain. In silence. The words hung in the air between them like a verdict. He remembered the call from Mrs. Gupta, their neighbor. How she'd found his mother after 3 days. How the tea had gone cold in the cup she'd been holding. How she'd been wearing her good sari because she thought he might visit that weekend. I'm sorry, Ma. I'm so sorry. The apology felt inadequate, pathetic. 3 years too late and a lifetime too small. Her figure began to shimmer, fading in and out like a bad television signal. The room grew darker, colder, and the sound of rain intensified until it seemed like the whole world was drowning. You promised me, she whispered again, her voice becoming fainter with each word. You promised you would come back. And then she was gone. The temperature returned to normal. The kitchen light flickered back on with an electric hum that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. The lights returned with a fluorescent buzz. The door swung open easily, as if it had never been stuck at all. Outside, the corridor was empty again. The footprints had vanished, leaving only the faded carpet and the persistent smell of disinfectant that pervaded all old buildings. He stepped out, still crying, and collapsed to his knees on the rough carpet. The tears came harder now, 3 years of suppressed grief pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. He wept for his mother, for the promises he'd broken, for the son he'd failed to be. The next morning, his neighbor found him still sitting by the doorway, eyes red, face pale. Mrs. Chin, clutching her morning newspaper, had stopped short when she saw him there. Mr. Sharma, are you all right? He didn't speak for hours. When the paramedics came, Mrs. Chin had been worried about a medical emergency. He just sat there, staring at the spot where his mother had stood. When he finally did speak, all he said was, "She came back, and I broke her heart twice." He moved out the next week, taking only his clothes and laptop, leaving everything else behind. The ceramic teacup had returned to its box in the closet, wrapped in the same newspaper as if it had never moved. But he couldn't bring himself to touch it. No one took the apartment after him. The landlord tried to rent it out, showing it to a parade of potential tenants, but something always went wrong. The power would fail during viewings. Doors would stick. The temperature would drop inexplicably. Strange things kept happening. Other tenants reported whispers in the rain, always in a language they didn't understand but somehow knew was sorrowful. Footsteps echoed in the hallway at all hours, always the same small, bare feet, always walking the same path from the stairwell to apartment 4B. And on particularly stormy nights, 3 soft knocks still echoed through the corridor, always at the same door. Always the same rhythm. A mother's gentle call, persistent and patient, waiting for a son who will never answer. The building superintendent has stopped investigating the complaints. He knows no one is there. He also knows that some promises, once broken, echo forever in the spaces between what was and what should have been. The apartment remains empty, but never truly vacant. Love, it seems, is harder to evict than any tenant. The knocking had no rhythm. Just 3 slow, deliberate thuds against the wooden front door, softer than a fist, heavier than fingertips. Sam froze, halfway through pouring hot tea into 2 chipped mugs, his spine stiffening as the sound echoed again. Thud, thud, thud. He glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, drumming against the roof like distant footsteps. His cottage, tucked at the edge of a fading forest, wasn't exactly known for midnight visitors, especially not during a thunderstorm. He looked at Claire, curled on the couch beneath a blanket, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Claire nodded slowly. "Yeah. Who the hell would come all the way out here this late?" They exchanged a look, both reading the same rising unease in the other's face. Sam set the kettle aside and reached for the flashlight near the window. The power had gone out earlier that evening, and candles now flickered in orange pools across the living room. Thud, thud, thud. Slower this time, as if whoever or whatever was outside was savoring the moment. Sam walked carefully to the front door. The old wooden floor creaked beneath each step. He flicked the beam of light across the room and then toward the peephole. But it was fog from the inside, as if someone had breathed on the glass. He didn't open the door. Instead, he whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. Claire stood up now, the blanket falling to her feet. Her hand trembled slightly as she clutched the back of the chair. Sam, maybe don't open it. I wasn't planning on it. But then the knocking stopped. Not faded, not walked away, just stopped. Sam waited, counting his breaths. 1, 2, 3. A loud slap came from the back of the house, like a palm hitting the rear windows. Claire gasped. There's someone else around the back. Sam spun around, heart pounding, and swept the flashlight beam across the kitchen. Nothing. He moved quickly toward the back window. It was fog too, from the outside. A thin trail of moisture slid down the glass like a slow tear. Then came the whisper. Soft, delicate, right by his ear, though no one was near him. Let me in. Sam stumbled back, nearly knocking over the chair. Claire screamed from the living room. He ran back to her and saw her pointing at the window. A face, only half formed, was pressed against the glass. Pale, blurred, its mouth too wide, its eyes black voids that absorbed the light. Sam, what the hell is that? He didn't answer. Couldn't. His throat was too dry. The face began to move, sliding across the outside of the window like it was floating, not walking. Then it vanished into the dark. They locked every door and window they could find, pushed furniture against the entrances, lit every candle. They huddled in the center of the room, surrounded by dim, trembling flames, the power still dead, the wind howling outside. The rain intensified, and then, as if someone had turned a switch, it completely stopped. No more wind, no more thunder, just an unnatural silence, deep and oppressive. Claire whispered, "This feels wrong. Everything's just off." Sam nodded. "We wait till morning. Whatever it is, it can't last till dawn." But dawn never came. When they woke, everything outside was still pitch black. Their clocks all blinked 3 a.m. The rain had returned, but there was no light behind the clouds, no hint of morning. The sun never rose. They tried to use their phones, but both screens were blank, no icons, no battery warnings, just dead. That's when the voices began. Soft, indistinct. They came from the walls, the floors, the very air around them. Whispered phrases like chants or lullabies. None in a language they understood, but they carried weight, thick, ancient, and cold. Claire cried once. A sharp, broken sound. The kind people make when they finally realize there's no help coming. They tried leaving. Sam opened the front door and stepped into the rain. The flashlight flickered, then died. In its momentary light, he saw trees, endless trees, towering and unfamiliar. Their driveway was gone. The road, even the sky. Just blackness. As if the world had closed in around their little house and refused to let them go. He came back inside soaked, shivering, and silent. Claire didn't ask what he saw. She could tell from his face. The next night, the knocking returned. But it wasn't just the door. It came from everywhere. Tapping on the windows, rapping on the walls, slapping beneath the floorboards. Something was testing the house. Each knock a question. Are you ready? Can we come in? Do you believe yet? They stopped sleeping, ate what little food they had left. Time twisted, minutes felt like hours, and days passed with no difference in light. They marked the walls just to track how long they'd been trapped. 17 tallies by the time Claire cracked. She walked to the front door on the 18th day. Maybe if we just let it in, it'll stop. Sam grabbed her. Don't even joke. I'm not. But she didn't open the door. On the 21st day, Sam heard her speaking in her sleep. Not English, not anything human, but he recognized the cadence. It was the same as the whispers in the walls. He didn't wake her. He just watched. On the 24th night, the door opened on its own. No wind, no footsteps, just open. Rain poured in, cold and black like ink. The candles blew out. The air filled with whispers. Then, for the first time, the face stepped inside. It wasn't a person. It wore the suggestion of a face, features like melted wax, expressionless and slick. It didn't walk. It glided, smooth and silent. Claire stood up calm, her eyes wide and unblinking. Sam, she said, voice hollow, it's here for me. No, you're not going. But she was already gone. The figure reached out, a long, boneless arm stretching like smoke, and touched her forehead. She collapsed into the floor, no blood, no sound, just gone. The thing turned to Sam. It didn't speak, but in his mind, he heard it. You were warned. She believed you did not. And then it left. Just vanished. Sam sat in silence, staring at the rain through the open door. When morning came, real morning, with sun and birds and warmth, he was alone. He buried Claire in the forest, tried to return to the world, but the world didn't want him. Phones never worked again. Electricity flickered when he entered rooms. And sometimes, in the middle of a stormy night, he hears the knocking again. 3 soft, deliberate thuds. Still waiting, still asking, do you believe now? We shouldn't be here, Jenna whispered, staring at the crumbling sign half buried in moss that read, Camp Hollow Creek, closed 1982. The rain had been relentless for hours, soaking the forest floor and washing out the trail they'd taken from the main road. She and her 2 friends, Caleb and Marcus, were soaked to the bone, their flashlight beams bouncing wildly through the fog that hugged the abandoned summer camp like a grave shroud. It's shelter, Marcus insisted, brushing wet leaves off his jacket. You want to stay out here all night? The camp looked like it had been ripped from a nightmare. Cabins with collapsed roofs, a moldy cafeteria still littered with rotted trays, and a chapel leaning sideways like it was trying to flee. Nature had swallowed it whole, but something about it still felt watched. They chose the largest remaining structure, a counselor lodge that hadn't entirely caved in. Inside, it smelled of mildew, old pine, and something faintly metallic. The rain drummed on the roof, and Caleb lit a small fire in the stone fireplace with dry twigs he'd found under a porch awning. Jenna sat closest to the fire, trying to warm her numb hands. I read about this place, she said, her voice just above a whisper. There was a fire here. Years ago, killed a bunch of kids. They say some were never found. Caleb rolled his eyes. Urban legends. No, she said sharply. It's real. They said the fire started in the chapel. A candle knocked over during a thunderstorm. They couldn't put it out in time. The counselors locked the doors. Thought the kids were just playing a prank. Silence settled over the group like a second fog. That's not exactly a great bedtime story, Marcus muttered, pulling his jacket tighter. Outside, the wind howled like a scream, and something thudded against the back wall of the cabin. Jenna flinched. Caleb grabbed the flashlight and stepped to the window. Probably just a branch, he said, or a raccoon. But as he looked out, the beam of his light caught movement, too tall for a raccoon. A figure, pale, still, watching. What the hell? He muttered. The light flickered, then died. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and for a moment, the only light came from the flames' glow dancing across their wide, tense faces. Guys, Caleb said, backing away from the window. Someone's out there. Marcus stood. We should leave. Now. Jenna's voice trembled. We can't. We'll get lost in the woods. We don't even know the direction we came from anymore. Better out there than in here with some creep." Before Marcus could finish, the back door creaked open, slowly, groaning like a wounded animal. All three froze. The air turned cold, unnaturally cold, as though the fire no longer mattered. A shadow spilled in through the open doorway, but there was no figure attached to it. Then, footsteps. Bare, wet, slapping softly on the warped wood floor. Closer, closer. "Who's there?" Caleb shouted. "We're armed." A laugh echoed in the room. Childlike, broken, like a music box left out in the rain. Jenna clutched her necklace, a tiny cross her grandmother had given her, and whispered a prayer. From the darkness near the kitchen, a voice hissed, "Where were you when we burned?" The fire died instantly. Smoke choked the air. They stumbled in panic, trying to relight their flashlights, get to the door, anything. The cabin groaned as though it were breathing. Then, a flash of light. Lightning outside, and in that split-second burst, they saw them. Children, dozens of them, faces charred, eyes glowing, standing shoulder to shoulder in the room. Silent, watching. Marcus screamed. Caleb turned to run, but slammed into an invisible wall. His nose broke with a crunch, blood spraying the floor. Jenna dropped to her knees, sobbing. "Don't look at them," she shouted. "Don't look." But it was too late. One by one, the dead children opened their mouths, revealing blackened tongues and ember-glowing throats. Heat rose in the room again, but not from the fire. From them. "You didn't come," they said in unison, voices layered and echoing. "You let us burn." Jenna cried. "We weren't even born." "You are them now," they replied. Flames burst from the floorboards, circling the trio. The walls of the cabin shimmered as if peeling away, revealing the charred bones of the structure beneath. The air filled with the scent of smoke, burning flesh, and melting plastic. The children stepped forward. Caleb screamed as fire erupted along his legs. He clawed at the floor, begging for help, but the floor collapsed beneath him, swallowing him into darkness. Marcus tried to leap through the fire, but it dragged him back like a hand around his ankle. He burned in silence, mouth open in an eternal scream. Jenna ran toward the chapel, the only structure still whole. It stood like a black cathedral, untouched by time. Rain hissed against its roof as if trying to put it out before it caught fire again. She burst through the doors and found it filled with candles, thousands of them, unlit. In the center, a single child knelt, hands folded in prayer, facing the altar. "Please," Jenna begged. "I didn't hurt you. I didn't do anything." The child turned. Her face was whole, young, but her eyes were ancient. "That's the problem," she said softly. "You did nothing." The chapel door slammed shut behind her. The windows vanished. The air grew thick with heat. The candles ignited, one by one, in a wave. The chapel filled with light, then with smoke, then with flame. From the road several miles away, a passing hiker would later report seeing strange lights in the forest that night. A glow, a flickering. But when authorities searched the camp the next day, they found only ashes. No remains. No signs of recent activity. Just the old sign lying in the mud. Camp Hollow Creek, closed 1982, and scrawled beneath it in black soot. "We're still waiting."